Fire Emblem Awakening is a game known for some of its mechanics that are perceived as super broken, whether that be dual strike and guard, Nosferatu tanking, or the most commonly mentioned skill of all, Gale Force. But today I want to talk about an option that I think is just as strong, if not stronger than many of those, and that's the Rescue Staff. I think the Rescue Staff is generally perceived to be good, but might be a little underrated in my audience based on the Awakening tier list we made in my community tab not too long ago. This isn't to say people think Rescue is bad, I just think it's really, really good. In that community list, a lot of the staffers went a little lower than I expected, with Lissa tier under Chrom and Anna and Libra falling well outside of the top tiers. Obviously, all of these units have great traits. Anna has really solid bases, Lissa has a monopoly on important early healing, and Libra is a solid early pre-promote, but to me, Rescue Access rockets all of these units to be among the best in the game. So let's talk about Rescue, why I think it's so good, and why I think it's even better than Gale Force for most players. I'll also touch here and there on why I think it's a fun, well-designed tool in Awakening. Alright, so if you haven't played Awakening in a while, or ever, and you need a refresher, here's how Rescue works. A staffer can use the staff to pull an allied unit to you at a range of their magic stat divided by 2. So if you've got 10 magic, you have a rescue range of 5. By default, rescuing will place the rescued unit on the tile beneath the rescue user, but you can manipulate that position by putting another unit in that space, or if that space is covered by terrain. This is actually relevant in some maps and situations because being able to rescue a unit to the side you want is sort of like moving that unit an extra 2 spaces. But rescue isn't just good for moving things around, it also provides 40 experience to the staff user and builds support rank between the staff user and the rescue target, although at a slower rate than things like fighting in a para. If you're familiar with Rescue in other games, none of this sounds too crazy, but there are a few unique factors about Awakening that make it a little more effective than usual. First, Rescue is an E-rank staff, meaning every staffer can use it immediately no matter how much experience they have, which is great because you get access to Rescue pretty early. The first guaranteed one comes in Donald's Paralog, which unlocks right after Chapter 3, and the second comes from a village in Chapter 8. They can also appear in Anna shops and in the early mid-game, regular shops. That Rescue is available in regular shops is the second important difference between Awakening Rescue and Rescue in other games. In most games you get a handful of rescues, sometimes coming towards the end of the game, and then you're done. In Awakening, Rescue is available early and in infinite quantities provided that you can afford them. They do cost 1,280 gold, which isn't nothing, but Awakening gives you a lot of money to work with, particularly if you're able to get side objectives, which Rescue can help you with. So that's how Rescue works. Let's talk about its applications and how it helps you win maps in the short term and set your army up for success in the long term. The most obvious use of Rescue is the one that first pops into mind when you hear the name of the staff. If you send a unit into danger, you can use the Rescue Staff to drag them back to safety. This can be used to fix a mistake or enable aggressive plays. Maybe there's a dangerous enemy like a Siege Tome user or a longbow sniper. You want to clear them out so you have an easier enemy phase, but you're worried that the unit that runs out ahead to kill the enemy won't be able to survive that far ahead. That's where Rescue comes in. Run that unit ahead, kill that sniper or Siege Tome user, and then have your staffer bring your combat unit right back to safety. This can also be used to make time-sensitive objectives easier. You can send a flyer ahead to kill a thief or open a chest, and then use Rescue to save them from facing a scary enemy phase. You can even use it to help train a low-level unit, especially the child units that join later in the game at low levels. The Rescue Staff enables you to have those units fight enemies on player phase without being in any real danger because you can always just pull them back to safety if you need to. So that's the obvious use for Rescue, but there's a lot more we can do with it than just keep our units safe. We can also use it aggressively to functionally give our units more movement. While the staff's name implies defensive use, you can always have a staffer run out ahead and then use Rescue to pull a unit up towards them, giving that unit a nice move boost and maybe even getting them around terrain that they wouldn't have been able to pass on their own. Rescue in Awakening is even better at this than in other games because of pair-up and the availability of rescue staves. Pair-up lets you do things like stick your staff user on a flyer so that you can fly as far forward as possible, switch to your staffer, and then rescue another unit, so that second unit gets to benefit from flyer mobility while still being able to have whatever pair-up partner they want. The availability of rescue staffs is what really makes them go crazy in Awakening though, because when you have multiple rescues and multiple staffers, you can start chaining them together. Instead of rescuing a combat unit forward, what if we rescue another rescuer? And then have that rescuer rescue another rescuer, and then have that rescuer rescue our combat unit. With enough rescuers and a little planning, we can often get a unit almost anywhere on a map in a single turn. This is great for grabbing time-sensitive objectives or just completing maps quickly, which can be a big help in Awakening Lunatic, where a lot of people struggle with ambush reinforcements. One of the more infamous maps in Fire Emblem Awakening is Chapter 16, the big tree map with the ambush flyers that spawn on either side. And if you're struggling with those ambush spawns, the easiest way to deal with them is to just win the map before they spawn. Chaining together a few rescues lets our boss killer get to the boss very quickly, and can also help make sure you get to pick up the side objectives before you finish the boss and leave the map. With clever use of rescue and enough staffers, you can get all of this done on turn 1 or 2 and avoid the ambush spawns entirely. This strategy won't be foreign to any Awakening players. Many players already use Gale Force to do that, and you might be thinking, why chain together a bunch of rescues when I could just Gale Force right to the boss and not have to worry about having multiple staffers and figuring out how to position them all? And that's fair, but the reason you might prefer rescue is simple. It comes earlier, has no trigger condition, and doesn't require you to put your combat unit in a specific class to learn the skill. Trying to get Gale Force as early as possible often means putting your best combat unit into Dark Flyer during maps like Chapter 12 and Chapter 9, both of which are way easier if your combat unit is in a class with better stats and no flyer weakness, such as Hero. And that's just for one Gale Force unit. The more Gale Force units you want, the more you need to train in Dark Flyer, and the more investment you need to give them all, because they all need to be able to kill enemies to trigger their skill. Rescue allows us many of the tactical advantages of Gale Force, but with almost no barrier to entry. And before becoming Rescue Pilled, I assumed that there were surely maps where you would need Gale Force to get to the boss quickly or to do a side objective quickly, but you really can just get by with Rescue almost all of the time. I'll have a bunch of clips playing of me using Rescue to traverse maps in the next few minutes, and you might be surprised just how far a fistful of Rescue staves and a dancer can take you without having to use Gale Force. And this is why I actually prefer Rescue to Gale Force for most playthroughs. It allows you to put your combat unit in whatever class makes the map the easiest and improves their combat the most, without having to go through Dark Flyer and without sacrificing much strategically. I would much rather be able to Unga Bunga my way through Chapter 12 by just walking forward with Hero Robin, than have to avoid all the Bow Knights and Beast Slayers on a squishier Dark Flyer Robin, particularly since Gale Force tends to come online after the most difficult portion of Awakening anyway. But Rescue isn't just strategically useful in the sense that it helps you clear maps with almost no barrier to entry, it also provides a font of experience and support points for your staffers. Like I mentioned earlier, Rescue gives its user a whopping 40 experience per use and progresses supports a little bit with the unit being rescued. Since rescues are affordable and can be used every turn, they are a great way to provide experience to your army in a way that doesn't take away from any combat units you're training. Provided you aren't doing grinding maps, there's only so much combat experience to go around in Awakening. It's enough to train multiple combat units, but as you add more, you eventually get to the point where units start to siphon away experience from each other, because there's a limited amount of enemies for them to kill. So imagine, instead of running 6 or 7 combat units, we replace the last couple with a staffer. Instead of fighting for the scraps of enemies left behind by our other combat units, they can just use Rescue and score 40 experience points per turn while providing mobility and security to their allies. And the combat units we are using get even more of the experience pie for themselves because they don't have to share it with this staffer. When you train a unit using staffs like this, they won't end up as high a level as your top 1 or 2 combat units, but they'll be keeping pace or outpacing units that aren't seeing multiple rounds of combat per turn. And what's awesome is that this also increases their ability to contribute in combat. Take Lissa, for example. She can spam staves to level up, and this will give her respectable magical chip and a rally skill whether she's in Sage or Valkyrie later in the game. Units like Cordelia have the option of going Falco Knight and using Rescue to supplement their EXP gain on any turn where they aren't attacking on player phase. This also builds support points, which is great because it can be tricky to build supports on units that don't attack a lot or struggle in combat. You do have to pay for the staves, so it's not quite free real estate, but for no investment beyond the cost of the staff, you get all the strategic utility that Rescue offers, while also getting a sack full of experience you can hand out to your staffers at will. You can basically think of rescue staves as buyable EXP that also helps you win maps. To me, that's a pretty strong sales pitch for rescue, but it does have some limitations, and it's only fair to talk about them. First is that while the staff's range being magic divided by 2 is great for units with good magic, it's a downside for units with lower magic and limits your ability to pull a unit off the bench and have them contribute to rescue strategies really well. This isn't the end of the world though. If you need a large rescue range, rallies, tonics, and pair-ups all provide ways to boost magic, and the game is also kind enough to just give you 2 staffers with good base magic in Anna and Libra. Realistically, you probably also used Lissa or Maribel for early healing, and their magic will be decent to good as well. The magic divided by 2 range on rescue is mostly a downside for units like Cordelia, whose magic situation is pretty abysmal. If you send her into Falco Knight, her rescue range could be as low as 2, but even that isn't actually as bad as it sounds. Being able to move an ally 2 or 3 spaces isn't as flashy as a giant 12 range rescue, but it's still useful pretty often. Think about how often you wish a unit could move just 1 or 2 spaces. Well, even the weakest rescuer in Awakening can make that happen, and pocket themselves some EXP for providing the service. Tonics are also so cheap that you can sort of imagine everyone's rescue range as one longer than it actually is, because by the time rescue staves are available, you can always afford a magic tonic for all of your staffers. For some fancier late-game rescues, you do benefit from high magic stats, but since rescue provides a lot of EXP, and rallies and tonics exist, this usually isn't a huge problem. And as far as the EXP and support building benefits of rescue, those are great no matter how high your magic is. What can be a more meaningful issue for rescue is that some more complex rescue strategies require multiple rescuers with decent range. This isn't a huge deal for most maps, but if you're trying to do skips in the late game on a save where you've trained no staffers, you might have problems. And this gets to rescue's biggest weakness compared to Awakening's other powerful tools. It does require some pre-planning and strategizing. Soul and Nosferatu largely just let you walk forward and succeed a lot of the time. And if you want to skip a map with Gale Force, it's often as simple as run forward, kill enemy, run forward, kill boss. While rescue can often get you the same results, it requires you to figure out the best way to position your staffers to get the most out of it, and sometimes that can be tricky. But as long as you're willing to think about how you can best put it to use, the possibilities of what you can do with rescue are pretty incredible. So incredible that I put Lissa, Anna, and Libra all in my top 10, and pretty much anyone who can hold a staff without a second seal gets a major bump in my mind. Because rescue is super strong, it gets stronger when you have more units that can use it, and it provides all of its great benefits for the low cost of a little over 250 gold per cast. Plus, it's just a really fun staff to use. That you need to put some thought into how you use rescue to get the most out of it, and maybe train some staffers for certain strategies, is actually why it's one of my favorite staves in the series. Infinite range movement staves in the earlier Fire Emblem games can result in some maps that give you the option to basically avoid engaging with them at all. The entire endgame of FE3 Book 1, for example, can all be completed in the exact same way. Warp the boss killer to the boss, warp Marth, seize throne. Obviously, you can choose not to do this, but it's a way in which infinite range warp invalidates all of the features that distinguish these maps from each other. In Awakening, while you can use rescue to complete maps very quickly, the distinctions between maps still matter. Since you have to get your rescuer to the right place, you often have to kill units in their path, and since rescue isn't unlimited range and can't maneuver someone further up than your frontmost unit, figuring out how to get from point A to point B requires more careful consideration versus just warping your best unit to the boss. It also demands that you use more units. In this one turn of Chapter 17, I use every unit in my roster in a way that I just don't in one turns of FE3. Granted, in a slower playthrough I probably wouldn't have to use all of these units because I would have a couple rescuers with higher range, but I would definitely still need to use a handful of units. This is also something cool about the rescue staff in Awakening. Your rescue strats from one playthrough to the next might actually change a bit depending on how high the magic stat is on your rescuer and what class they're in. A Falco Knight with lower magic has different rescue options than a Sage with higher magic, for example. And even in a single playthrough, the terrain and shape of maps being different means figuring out how to use rescue on one map doesn't mean you've figured it out on all of them. Something like Awakening's volcano map has a different rescue strategy than other maps because of how it's laid out. It emphasizes using your flyers and maneuvering around terrain in a way that other chapters might not. So there's just a lot to think about with rescue, and you're rewarded for thinking about it. Even stuff like figuring out how to manipulate the position of the rescue target is fun and rewarding. This clear of Chapter 10, for example, is only possible by covering up the spaces adjacent to the rescue user to ensure the rescue target is dropped on the tile closest to the boss. Similarly, in Tiki's paralog, you can greatly diminish the space that you need to defend by rescuing Tiki against the top wall of the map, but doing so requires you to know that you can manipulate where the rescued target is going to end up. So it's not like you get the rescue staff and feel like you just got a tool that allows you to thoughtlessly beat the rest of the game, which is how some games can feel when you get the warp staff. That's why I love rescue in this game so much from a design standpoint. It's really powerful, but there's so many different clever ways to use it that it adds dimension to the game. Combined with pair-up movement skills and rallies, rescue helps create a game where you are really rewarded for thinking about how to make use of your movement options. It makes you feel smart when you combine these features in tandem for really big turns, and to me, one of the measures of a good Fire Emblem mechanic is if it rewards consideration and makes you feel smart for using it. Another thing that I think is praiseworthy about Rescue's design in basically the entire series is that it offers something to players of all kinds. For players like me who enjoy playing Awakening fast and yeeting my characters across the map, Rescue is a fun tool that opens up a lot of options without being thought-terminating. For players that prefer to play at a slower pace, Rescue still has obvious applications, engaging in hit-and-run tactics, recovering from mistakes, grabbing Libra on his join map before the red units kill him, rushing Anna ahead to grab a chest before a thief can get to it and then whisking her away to safety. Rescue can enable all of these strategies, all while building up the staff user and growing their support ranks. So, Rescue isn't just one of the strongest tools in Awakening, it's also one of the tools that makes Awakening fun for me, and its accessibility gives it a very unique playstyle in this game that sets it apart from other games in the series, even though Rescue appears in those games too. I would say Awakening probably makes Rescue a little too available. Maybe it could be a little more expensive or be a staff rank higher than E, but I would prefer games err towards providing staves like Rescue earlier and more often versus something like FE8 where it's around for just the last few chapters of the game. To me, Rescue is the gold standard mobility staff, and if you aren't using it, I think starting to is a great way to make Awakening a little bit easier and more fun, especially if you're having trouble on some of the higher difficulties. Thanks for sticking around to the end of the video. If you enjoyed it, consider hitting the like or subscribe button so you never miss an upload. And a big shout out to my super skinks on Patreon, Lonely Voxel and the Noodle Doodler, along with the other skinks, Marms, Shake Her Hand, Nepsit, Muted Miami, Doopy, Stars to Art, Wingman, Upscale Furry Trash, Cosplay Sylveon, Aikipu, Lucy Sev, Emma, Aarongeddon, Red Mage Morgan, N6, and Punch Fighter Champion. If you want to support the channel, you'll find a link to the Patreon in the video description. Either way, thanks for hanging out until the end of the video, and I hope you have yourself a lovely week.